Hello class, Mike Harris here, my attending assignment, week 4. This is my little picture. I don't know if it's been reversed or not, but there it is. My story is the feeding of the 5,000, so you can see in the middle there, either forwards or backwards, the loaves and fishes. As I consider the story of the feeding of the 5,000, I realise that in many ways the loaves and the fishes were right in the centre of everything. The need for hunger built up to that, and obviously the satisfaction of eating came from that. I was reminded of one of my favourite ever films. It's the musical Oliver. Of course, it's the great story of Oliver Twist, done to a musical. And there's this wonderful scene at the beginning of the film where Oliver, who's in an orphanage, goes to Mr. Bumble, played by Harry Seacombe, and asks for more food. He drew the long straw, and as he went up there, he held his plate out very tentatively and said, "Please, sir, can I have some more?" And Harry Seacombe and Mr. Bumble said, "More?" My kids love that little story of Oliver Twist, but it was hunger that drove this kid to something very desperate, and the other kids to do that. The gruel was not enjoyable, but it filled the gap. It satisfied the need for something to eat. So I'm thinking about that. I also recall the story of Jonathan Edwards, who was an English athlete. Jonathan Edwards is still the world record holder at the triple jump, a jump he made back in 1995. But Jonathan Edwards is also a very devout Christian. For the longest time he wouldn't compete on Sundays, until a friend of him persuaded that it's okay to compete on Sundays as long as you honour God by doing it. And he eventually won the Olympic Games, but in 1995 he won. He became the world record holder. Before he went to the Olympics, he was very concerned. He wanted to make sure that he honoured God in all that he did, and he felt although God had honoured him with his great ability as a triple jumper, he still felt it wasn't enough. And so a good friend of his, a guy by the name of Phil Wall, who was his spiritual advisor, and Phil Wall is a Salvationist, and that's how I know the story. Phil Wall said, "Look, Jonathan, it's like the loaves and fishes. You present to God what you have, and he will do marvellous things with it." And so that's what God has done with Jonathan Edwards. He's taken this ability to be a triple jumper, and he's turned it into a great ability to be an evangelist. And many, many souls have been won through the work of Jonathan Edwards. Also, as I think about the loaves and fishes and the paltry amount that is brought before God, I'm reminded of a guy called Sunbeam. Now, I referred to Sunbeam once in an early post. And Sunbeam was a guy that grew up in when I grew up in Coventry, my hometown of Coventry. Sunbeam was somebody that had been going to the church for many years and was quite old when I was a kid. And the way Sunbeam was talked about in our home, it was almost like he was second only to the Lord himself in holiness. I mean, Sunbeam was just amazing. I didn't see Sunbeam much because I said he was old when I was a kid, but I remember one Sunday he was well enough to come to church, and my dad pointed him out. And I watched as Sunbeam picked up the songbooks, and I thought, wow, I can't talk to the guy, he's too amazing to talk to, so I decided to pick up songbooks. And what I found out later in life was Sunbeam was also the most famous Christian in all of Coventry. In Coventry, a city of about 350,000 people, which in English terms is a big city, Sunbeam was the most famous Christian. He would walk around town in his Salvation Army uniform saying, "I'm happy, happy in the Lord, happy." And he became so well known as this. And it was only in later years that I discovered that Sunbeam was a very simple man, not so much in means, though that certainly was the case, but his mental capacity. And yet somehow God used this man of limited mental means to do amazing things for him. And even to this day I can go online and find reference to Sunbeam from those who remember him. I remember my sister singing a solo when she was a kid, and it was about Christmas time. And it went something like this. I'm not singing too loud because I'm at my office and I've got a whole bunch of employees who are nearby, and the last thing I want them to do is start laughing at the captain because of his singing. But the song goes like this. What can I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd, I would give a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. What can I give him? I can give my heart. Excuse me. And I love that little song because it helps me remember. God doesn't expect me to come forward and be completely equipped and armed with all these abilities and skills. He wants me to bring what I have, and first and foremost my heart. And with that, he will do amazing things. About 3 years ago, I was sitting in the chapel here at the Salvation Army. And it was men's club. And we were watching some kind of movie. And in walks this guy from the shelter. He sits down in the chapel about 3 rows in front. Not an unusual happening. And he sits down and watches the movie. And after about 5 minutes, he turns to me and he says, I've just checked into the shelter and I'm hungry. Do you have any food? My response was, oh man, I'm sorry you missed the kitchen. I'm sorry it's closed. I hate that you're hungry. And I sat down and carried on watching the movie. And all of a sudden I thought, that was a ridiculous response. I mean, the guy's hungry. So I got up and I went to the church kitchen. I gathered some food, put it in a bag, brought it back to him. It wasn't anything great, but it was something to fill the gap. And he was so grateful, so grateful. What I never knew and would never have known was from that moment what God would do with that relationship between me and Daniel. It's been quite a journey with this guy. He was in our homeless shelter, terrible alcohol problems. He really, he desired so much to be close to the Lord. And he was doing so well, and then he left the shelter, he got work, left the shelter. The alcohol got the better of him again. I remember going to his hotel room and just holding this man, a pathetic drunk, in a seedy hotel room, just being there and holding him, and eventually getting him into hospital, getting him sober, getting him back into the shelter. And then we went through the whole cycle all over again. And this time I said, the shelter's not going to do it. We're going through rehabilitation. And now he's on the other end of rehabilitation, 6 months of residential care there. And he's back with us here in Hickory and doing really well. He's working. He's in our transitional housing program. And God has just used this to help me to grow, and also for Daniel. And it all started with a bag of food, a guy that was hungry, wanting something to eat. Again, a great example of how God multiplied based on hunger. One of my favourite stories is the story of Bob Geldof. Most Brits know who he is. One of two of you may have heard of the name, I don't know. But he was a singer in England, and his group was called the Boomtown Rats, and they had some big hits in the very late 70s and early 80s. In 1983, Bob Geldof was watching television. He was watching the BBC as they had images of a terrible famine that was going on in Ethiopia. And again, my thought of this process is brought about by the loaves and fishes and the hunger that was represented. And as he saw these images of exceptional, extreme starvation, he was moved beyond anything. And he called up a good friend of his called Midge Ure, and Midge was a singer with another group in the 80s. And he got in a taxi, that being Bob Geldof, to go see his friend Midge Ure. And on the way, he penned the words to a song, and together they put the music to it. And the song, you'll be hearing it a lot on the radio very soon. It said, "Do they know it's Christmas time at all?" By Band Aid. What they did was to bring together the biggest artists of the day, and they recorded this song, raised millions and millions of pounds, and were able to send aid over to Ethiopia. It was also the catalyst for the 1985 Live Aid concert, which again Bob Geldof was in the middle of doing. And it was a remarkable event, as this concert basically happened in 2 separate continents. It was a unique one-off event that still lives in the memory for every good reason. And millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars were raised for it, but all based on the idea of people who were starving to death, hungry beyond anything else. And I guess that brings it to me. The idea again of the loaves and fishes being presented before God, of Jesus offering thanks and then multiplying those loaves and fishes. I think that's what God has done with me. I don't have much to bring, I really don't. There's no modesty involved in that, it's the absolute case. I'm not exceptionally skilled at anything, I'm not exceptionally clever. However, somehow God is just using the little offering I put before him. And he has done things that have been so exciting, and he's moved my life and given me opportunities that I would never have imagined. So I praise God for what he's done in my life. But again, based on the concept of the loaves and fishes that the little boy brought before Jesus, having no idea what Jesus would do with it. And I praise God for that. So that's my presentation, and I hope it helps and makes some sense. And God bless you guys, and happy Thanksgiving.